Imagine being remembered for one act that defines your entire existence, an act so controversial it casts a shadow over everything else you've ever done. This is the story of Judas Iscariot, a man whose name has become synonymous with betrayal. Yet beneath the layers of condemnation lies an enigma. Why would Jesus, who is said to know all, choose Judas as one of his closest followers? Was Judas simply a villain, or was he a necessary instrument in a grander design? In the Gospel accounts, Judas is a paradox, a man who walked with Jesus, witnessed miracles, and shared in his teachings, yet ultimately played the pivotal role in delivering him to his enemies. But before we judge him, let's uncover the details of his life and the mystery surrounding his selection as one of the 12 apostles. Who was Judas Iscariot before his infamous betrayal? The Bible gives us only glimpses of his life before meeting Jesus. Judas hailed from the region of Kerioth, making him the only disciple not from Galilee. This distinction alone set him apart from the others. Did this geographical difference influence his actions or his place among the 12? When Jesus began gathering his disciples, he deliberately chose individuals from diverse backgrounds, from fishermen like Peter to tax collectors like Matthew. Judas's inclusion among them wasn't accidental. It raises the question, what did Jesus see in him? Was Judas chosen for his potential to lead, or for a specific role that only he could fulfill? From the moment Judas joined Jesus' inner circle, he witnessed events that most could only dream of: healings, exorcisms, and the raising of the dead. He listened to sermons that revealed profound truths about life, love, and the kingdom of God. So why would someone exposed to such divine power turn against the very source of it? Some scholars suggest that Judas's role as the group's treasurer may provide a clue. Entrusted with managing the disciples' finances, Judas had access to resources and wielded a level of authority. However, this position also exposed him to temptation. The Gospels later accuse him of being dishonest with the group's funds, implying that his heart may have been swayed by greed long before his fateful act. Yet greed alone doesn't fully explain Judas's story. Jesus was known for his discernment, for seeing into the hearts of men. He called Peter, a hot-headed fisherman, and turned him into a leader. He called Matthew, a despised tax collector, and made him a witness of grace. Why then would Jesus call Judas, knowing what he would do? Here lies the profound mystery. Was Judas chosen for redemption or for betrayal? Perhaps he wasn't chosen despite his flaws, but because of them. Could it be that Judas's actions, as reprehensible as they appear, were part of a divine strategy to bring about the ultimate act of salvation? As we delve deeper into the story of Judas, we must keep in mind that his selection as one of the 12 was no accident. Whether he was a willing participant or a pawn in a larger plan, Judas's inclusion in Jesus' inner circle sets the stage for a series of events that would forever alter history. Was he a man of faith who stumbled, or a man chosen specifically to betray? The enigma of Judas's role remains one of the most compelling and controversial aspects of the gospel narrative. The truth, as we'll explore, may not be as simple as labeling him a villain. Instead, it invites us to question the nature of free will, destiny, and the unfathomable depths of the divine plan. The night Judas Iscariot sealed his place in history is one of the most dramatic and haunting events recorded in the Bible. But why did he do it? Was it sheer greed, a loss of faith, or something far more complex? To understand Judas's betrayal, we must examine the moments leading up to it and the motivations that may have driven him to betray Jesus with a kiss. Judas's act of betrayal is marked by the infamous exchange of 30 pieces of silver. On the surface, this seems like an insultingly small price for the life of someone as significant as Jesus. These coins were not a king's ransom, but rather the standard compensation for a slave. Why would Judas, who had spent years alongside Jesus, settle for such a meager sum? Some argue that greed was the primary factor. As the group's treasurer, Judas was entrusted with managing their finances, but the Gospels hint that he was less than honest. John 12:6 accuses Judas of stealing from the communal funds. Could his betrayal have been the culmination of a growing obsession with wealth? Or was it something deeper, an act of desperation fueled by disillusionment? Others suggest that Judas may have been disheartened by Jesus' refusal to lead a political uprising against Roman rule. Many of Jesus' followers, including Judas, likely expected the Messiah to establish a powerful earthly kingdom. Instead, Jesus preached humility, sacrifice, and a kingdom not of this world. Did Judas's disillusionment lead him to believe that handing Jesus over to the authorities would force his hand, to either demonstrate his divine power or step aside for someone else? The manner of betrayal also speaks volumes. Judas could have simply revealed Jesus' location to the religious authorities. Instead, he chose a kiss, a symbol of intimacy and trust, to identify him in the Garden of Gethsemane. Was this a cruel irony or a sign of inner conflict? Even as Judas betrayed Jesus, did he feel a lingering loyalty or guilt? Then there's the question of timing. Why betray Jesus during the Passover, one of the most sacred times for the Jewish people? Scholars suggest that the timing was strategic, ensuring Jesus would be captured with minimal public resistance. But was Judas the mastermind behind this timing? Or was he merely a pawn in a larger plot orchestrated by the religious leaders? The betrayal also raises unsettling theological questions. If Jesus knew Judas would betray him, as the scriptures suggest, did Judas truly have free will? Or was he destined to fulfill this role, a cog in the divine machinery leading to the crucifixion? Judas's betrayal was not just an act of treachery, it was a turning point that set in motion the events leading to the crucifixion and resurrection. Yet it remains shrouded in ambiguity. Was Judas a cold-hearted traitor, a misguided zealot, or an unwitting participant in a divine plan he couldn't fully comprehend? The kiss of Judas lingers in history as a paradoxical symbol, an act of ultimate betrayal cloaked in the guise of affection. It challenges us to grapple with the complexities of human nature, the tension between free will and destiny, and the profound mystery of why one of Jesus' closest companions would turn against him. The answer, perhaps, lies not in simple condemnation, but in understanding the human condition itself. One of the most enduring mysteries surrounding Judas Iscariot is whether his betrayal was an act of free will or a necessary step in a predestined divine plan. If Jesus, as the Gospels suggest, knew from the beginning that Judas would betray him, did Judas ever truly have a choice, or was he simply playing an unavoidable role in a cosmic drama? This question has puzzled theologians for centuries. On one hand, the concept of free will is central to the Christian understanding of morality and accountability. Judas's betrayal, as recorded in the Gospels, seems to be a deliberate act. He approached the chief priests, negotiated the terms, and later carried out the betrayal in the Garden of Gethsemane. These actions suggest intent and agency, qualities that imply Judas had the freedom to choose his path. However, the narrative also raises troubling questions about destiny. In John 6:70-71, Jesus refers to Judas as a devil long before the betrayal occurs, indicating he was aware of Judas's future actions. During the Last Supper, Jesus explicitly identifies Judas as the betrayer, stating, "The one who dips his hand into the bowl with me will betray me," Matthew 26:23-24. If Jesus knew, was Judas ever truly free to act otherwise? Some argue that Judas's role was predestined, a necessary part of the divine plan for salvation. Without his betrayal, the crucifixion, the cornerstone of Christian theology, might not have occurred. In this interpretation, Judas becomes less of a villain and more of a tragic figure, fulfilling a role he neither fully understood nor desired. But if Judas was predestined to betray Jesus, does that absolve him of moral responsibility? This leads to a profound theological tension. Can someone be blamed for actions that were foreordained? If God's plan required Judas to betray Jesus, was Judas a sinner or an instrument of divine will? To reconcile this paradox, some theologians propose that Judas's betrayal was both predestined and voluntary. In other words, God's omniscience didn't negate Judas's free will, but rather worked through it. Judas chose to betray Jesus out of his own desires, whether greed, disillusionment, or something else entirely, yet his actions aligned with God's greater plan. This interpretation raises further questions about the nature of free will and divine sovereignty. How much control do we truly have over our lives? Are we free agents, or are our choices subtly guided by forces beyond our comprehension? Judas's story forces us to confront these unsettling questions, not just about his fate, but about our own. Ultimately, Judas's betrayal embodies the tension between human agency and divine purpose. Was he a villain acting out of selfish motives, or a tragic figure swept up in a plan far larger than himself? The answer may lie somewhere in between, a mystery that invites us to reflect on the complexities of choice, responsibility, and the unfathomable depth of the divine plan. Judas Iscariot's betrayal of Jesus is one of the most infamous acts in history, but his story doesn't end there. After realizing the gravity of his actions, Judas was overcome with guilt, returning the silver he had received and lamenting his betrayal. But was his remorse a step toward redemption, or was he forever lost in the shadow of his sin? The Gospels describe Judas's deep regret. In Matthew 27:3-4, he confesses to the chief priests, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." His return of the 30 pieces of silver demonstrates an attempt to undo his wrongdoing. Yet unlike others who failed Jesus, such as Peter, Judas didn't seek forgiveness from God or Jesus himself. Instead, he succumbed to despair, taking his own life. This raises profound questions. Could Judas have been forgiven if he had sought it? Christian theology often emphasizes that no sin is too great to be forgiven, provided the sinner truly repents. Jesus' own words on the cross, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing," suggest a willingness to extend grace even to those directly responsible for his death. If forgiveness was possible for his crucifiers, why not for Judas? The story of Peter provides a stark contrast. Peter denied Jesus 3 times, yet his heartfelt repentance led to reconciliation and a pivotal role in the early church. Was Judas incapable of imagining such a future for himself? Or did his overwhelming shame blind him to the possibility of grace? Some interpretations, like the controversial Gospel of Judas, suggest that Judas's actions were not entirely his own. In this narrative, Judas acts at Jesus' request, playing a role in a divine plan that was necessary for the crucifixion to occur. If this were true, Judas's actions might not have been purely treacherous, but part of a greater, misunderstood purpose. Could this reframe him as more of a tragic figure than a villain? Alternatively, some theologians propose that Judas's redemption may have hinged on his response to his guilt. His acknowledgement of sin was a critical step, but his failure to seek forgiveness or reconciliation with Jesus marked a missed opportunity. Was his isolation self-imposed, or was it a reflection of his belief that his sin was unforgivable? Judas's story invites us to grapple with the nature of guilt, forgiveness, and the human condition. It asks us to consider whether remorse alone is enough, or if redemption requires an active step toward grace. Judas's despair serves as a cautionary tale of how guilt can consume us, but his initial regret suggests a glimmer of hope, a path not taken. In the end, the question of Judas's redemption remains unanswered, leaving us to wrestle with the profound mystery of grace. Could even the ultimate betrayer have found forgiveness if he had sought it? Or was his fate sealed the moment he betrayed Jesus? His story challenges us to reflect on the transformative power of forgiveness and whether it is truly available to all who seek it. The legacy of Judas Iscariot is one of the most complex and controversial in all of Christian history. His name has become synonymous with betrayal, and his actions have sparked debates about morality, free will, divine will, and the very nature of sin. But what lasting impact did Judas's betrayal leave on the world? Beyond the immediate consequences of his actions, Judas's legacy continues to shape theological discussions, societal views on morality, and the understanding of redemption. One of the most enduring aspects of Judas's legacy is his role as the archetype of the betrayer. His name is universally recognized, and in many cultures, it has become synonymous with treachery. To Judas, someone is to deceive or betray them in the most profound way. This has solidified his place in literature, art, and popular culture as the ultimate symbol of betrayal, often overshadowing his complexities as a character and reducing him to a mere villain. His actions have inspired countless works of art, literature, and even films, where he is often portrayed as the embodiment of evil. The image of Judas as a sinister figure is so deeply ingrained that it has shaped how societies view betrayal itself, associating treachery with an unforgivable moral breach. However, there is also a theological dimension to Judas's legacy that invites deeper reflection. His story has long been used as a cautionary tale about the consequences of sin and the danger of turning away from God. Yet, within Christian theology, the idea of Judas as a symbol of ultimate evil is increasingly complicated by the question of free will versus predestination. Did Judas act out of his own choice, or was he simply fulfilling a divine role as part of a larger plan? His betrayal becomes less of a personal failing and more of a necessary act in the context of the divine narrative, which raises questions about human agency and the nature of sin. Moreover, Judas's legacy prompts us to consider the concept of redemption on a grander scale. If Judas's actions were necessary for the fulfillment of prophecy, can we view him merely as a pawn in a divine scheme, or does he retain the full weight of moral responsibility for his betrayal? His remorse suggests that, like all human beings, he was capable of feeling guilt and regret. Yet, his inability to seek forgiveness from Jesus and his subsequent suicide left him with no opportunity for reconciliation, leaving his story unresolved. This ambiguity forces us to consider the limitations of forgiveness and redemption, as well as the human capacity for self-destruction when weighed down by sin. Judas's legacy also touches on the broader theme of divine justice. In many theological traditions, God's justice is seen as perfect and impartial. Judas's fate, then, raises questions about the fairness of divine judgment. Was Judas condemned to eternal punishment for his betrayal, or did his actions have a more profound yet mysterious purpose in the grand scheme of salvation? The idea that Judas's role was predestined complicates the understanding of his punishment, and the ultimate fate of his soul remains a topic of intense debate among theologians. In the end, the legacy of Judas Iscariot is one of contradiction and complexity. He is remembered as the greatest betrayer in history, yet his actions raise important theological questions that challenge the concepts of free will, redemption, and divine justice. His story is a reminder that even the darkest figures in history are shaped by forces beyond our understanding, and that the full meaning of their actions may not be clear in the moment, but is revealed over time. Judas's legacy endures not as a simple narrative of betrayal, but as a profound exploration of the complexities of human nature, divine purpose, and the possibility of redemption.